Welcome to Reframed, a podcast created to educate, encourage, and inspire parents and professionals. The Gladney Center for Adoption staff know parenting a child that has a history of loss, abuse, neglect, or trauma requires parenting skills and insight to be reframed in order to create a loving and caring environment. Reframed host Emily Morehead and guests strive to make an impact on our world through topics that are important to you, your family, and our communities. And now, here's your host, Emily Morehead.
Hi, and thanks for tuning in to another episode of Reframed. We're glad to have you. Today we're going to talk about domestic infant adoption, and I have my friend and colleague, Ashley Whiteside, with us today. And you're our in-house expert.
Thank you.
Ashley, tell us about yourself.
I am Ashley Whiteside. I am the manager of our domestic infant team, and I'm a licensed master's level social worker in Texas.
So cool. So how long have you been at Gladney?
I have been at Gladney for 14 years.
And some of us have worn different hats during our time at Gladney, so tell me about your experience here.
Yeah, so I originally started as a birth parent caseworker, which I always say is the hardest job at Gladney.
Yeah.
So I did that for roughly 6 years, and then I moved into my position as manager of the domestic infant program.
Okay, awesome. And so why do you think that's one of the hardest jobs?
First and foremost, we work with birth mothers that are all over the country, and Gladney really prides ourselves that we're going to make sure that we see all of our clients in person. It's just something that we think is necessary. We need to be in front of these young women, we need to be meeting with them, and so that requires us traveling, supporting them whenever they need us, whether it's at a doctor's appointment, and particularly when they deliver. And as you know, babies are never born Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. And so you find yourselves getting these calls from your client on Friday night at 8 o'clock saying she's going into labor, and the next thing you know, you're booking a flight. And so it just involves a lot of sacrifice of your own life, your own personal life. Your family misses you, your loved ones miss you, you just miss out on a lot of your life. We think it's so important and you dedicate yourself to that, but it by far is the hardest job at Gladney.
And your husband's a fireman, so who had more emergencies, you or him, when you were a birth parent caseworker?
Well, he would tell you that I did, that mine seemed to just come at the most difficult times. And so it really does affect your entire family. But like I said before, it's really important that these girls get supported because we may be their only support.
Absolutely. So Ashley, why would an expectant parent consider the option of adoption for their baby?
When our clients come to us, they are experiencing lots of different things in their lives. Some of the main reasons that we find our clients are considering adoption is potentially financial instability. They may not have a stable place to live or a stable job, so they're not really sure if they can potentially care for a baby. Another reason may be that they're really struggling with drugs and addiction issues. They may have other children, and they understand the reality of bringing a child back into this home, that would just be stressful, an added stress on to their already children that they're trying to parent. And then some of our women just have a path that's already been set for them. They are going to college and they're starting their careers, and they've just decided that this is not the time for them to start their family.
Sure, so the time just might not be right for them.
Right.
So how would an expectant parent learn about Gladney or even the option of adoption? Can you tell me what Gladney does to promote that?
So we do the typical internet, online marketing, so that when a young woman is looking online, trying to figure out what her options are, we want to be there. We want, if she is searching for certain words, we want to make sure that Gladney pops up. And so obvious that some marketing goes into that as well. But what the greatest thing that we do is really building relationships. We want to build relationships with those people that are going to come in contact with a woman who is pregnant and doesn't really understand or know what she's going to do. So that is with medical providers, those are with pregnancy resource centers, those are with hospitals, and all of the people that will come into her life during her pregnancy. We also have a program called Adopt Ed, which is a program that we put into our schools. There was a need for adoption to be recognized as a teaching opportunity for our kids in school, and that wasn't available. And so curriculum was created, and we go into hundreds and hundreds of high schools every year to educate students about that this is an option for them. And so we hope that through all of those relationships, through all those learning opportunities, through educating the community, that we will be a place that when a young woman finds herself in an unplanned pregnancy, that she'll consider maybe just coming and getting information and just learning more.
So I think even when we're educating community members and just sharing about how different adoption looks like, it's really educating and sharing, here's what the process looks like. Can you walk me through it? I mean, adoption looks so much different than it did even 20 years ago.
Yes, it really does. At this point, our expected moms and their families and whoever else is involved, they are the ones choosing the families.
Yeah.
And then once that happens, it really is the expected mom and her family, whoever's involved, and the adoptive parents really coming together. And at that point, discussing openness and making plans and figuring out kind of what they want this relationship to look like and how they're all going to support this child together.
Yeah, that's really cool. So it's a togetherness approach.
Yes.
So what does it look like if a family's considering adopting a child? What does this look like for them?
So I know a lot of people have a lot of questions. This is just such an unknown process to so many people. And so
it's vulnerable.
It is. Most people are coming to us at a vulnerable place. And so they don't even know where to start most of the time. And they kind of come from ground zero. How does this work? What are we considering? What do we need to do? And the first thing that we hope that people do is go to our website. We think that we provide a lot of great information. But if that isn't enough for you, and if they want to pick up the phone and call somebody, we have incredible staff who are ready to just answer any question that they have. So that would be the first step, is to just get a little bit of insight onto the process, what happens, all of the ins and outs of domestic adoption. But then step 2 is that we have an orientation. We have a full day orientation that I think really gets people the meat of domestic adoption, and specifically what domestic adoption looks like at the Gladney Center. Adoption is different at every single agency. The terminology is different at every single agency. The way they do their match process is different at every agency. So coming to an orientation at Gladney will at least give you the ins and outs of how to do adoption at Gladney.
So it's just here's your options and your opportunities, and kind of figure out the fit for you and what works best for your family.
And we may not be the best fit for everybody, and that's okay. But we'd love for families to at least come, spend the day with us, get all their questions answered, and then make the best decision for their family.
So Ashley, tell me about the fee. I know that that's always a concern for people when they're interested in learning more about adoption.
Yeah.
Tell me what Gladney's structure looks like for that.
Gladney's fee structure is very, very different than most fee structures out there, but it was really designed to keep families in mind. We have an all-inclusive fee, which means that once you pay your fee, Gladney is never going to ask you for any other amount of money for any reason. So that would mean if you are matched with a young woman who has high expenses, it won't be an issue for you. We won't call you and say, unfortunately, your expectant mom has XYZ expenses and we're going to need you to cover those. That is part of your all-inclusive fee.
Okay.
As well as, which I know can be discussed out there in the adoption community, what happens to that money if an expectant mom decides to parent, to make a parenting plan. And at Gladney, that money is guaranteed for a placement. And so if you are matched with a young woman and she does decide to make a parenting plan, you don't lose any of your funds. We want to ensure that with that fee, you are going to receive placement. But we also acknowledge that it isn't inexpensive. We know that for sure. But I've seen so many families who would never think that they'd be able to afford this, do some incredible things. There's so many things out there in the community, whether it's loans, grants, other resources that can make this a reality for any family. We're going to put those in the show notes. So please, if anybody wants to go to a link so that they can see the different resources out there, this really can be a reality for anybody.
That's a really great resource. Thank you for sharing that, because I know that definitely can be a concern for families and we don't want it to be a hindrance.
Right.
And I think the great news of all of that is that it's not due at one time. So it's broken up over time because we understand that families need to get resources and plug in with those. I think it's also important to understand and to talk about Gladney's a nonprofit agency. So there's a lot of fundraising that happens to subsidize adoption, as well as ends up subsidizing every adoption that we handle, because adoption is expensive and that's part of the process. But serving expectant parents is priority for Gladney.
Right.
So tell me about language in adoption. We've used some language. You said the word match just now, and I think it's important to cover. So what are some of the hot topic words in adoption that you feel like families should know as they start this process?
I think the one that is natural for people, and I don't think that people are ill-intentioned by any means at all, but one of the things that people tend to just naturally say is that she gave up her child.
I've heard that so much.
And the reason why you can understand that may feel negative is that it kind of just gives the impression that she gave up. Yeah. She didn't care. Yeah. She just threw in the towel. She made the easier option. Mm-hmm. And if you've ever walked along a young woman who's made this decision,
oh my gosh, yeah,
there's nothing easy about it.
No.
It's painful, it's selfless, it's loving, it's strong, it's brave. I could go on and on and on. And so it just feels very negative to tell somebody that you just kind of gave up.
Yeah.
So we like to use the word placed.
Okay.
She's making a placement plan. It's just an alternative parenting plan. It involves a lot of work, just as it does to create a parenting plan.
Like I hear intentionality. I hear like, I've seen relinquishments before and placements, and I've seen birth mothers literally place that child into an adoptive parent's arms, and it's hard and it's beautiful and it's joy and pain coexist in that moment and an adoption. And so using the right language, I feel like it's empowering for the women and men who choose adoption. That's important. What other words are important for us to know?
I think one that has also been a little more current these days is the difference between an expectant mom and a birth mom, or an expectant father and a birth father. And the reason, the differential between that is that when she's making her plan, she's just an expectant mom. She's an expectant mom like any other woman out there experiencing a pregnancy. She's not a birth mother until she's actually placed that child for adoption. So we like to honor her in the realness of who she is. And so that is, while she's currently pregnant, making whatever plan she is, she's just an expectant mom.
That's important.
And then once she places, we like to transition that word over to a birth mother.
Yeah, and that's when she can take ownership of when she's ready to use that terminology. That's really important. Thanks for sharing that language. So Ashley, you were talking about adoptions, and when we talked about kind of they look different and they're different kinds of relationships, and it's both parties coming together for what's in the best interest of that child. Tell me what relationships look like. I know adoptions even evolved in how open they are, or semi-open. Can you walk me through those important pieces of terminology and kind of help me understand what Gladney practices?
Sure. So we kind of have some minimums at Gladney. And so at minimum, we require that you share your first name, that you shared with a family what state you live in, not necessarily your city. That you would share your profession, but not exactly where you work. So as you can understand, there's kind of these non-identifying information that we ask that are just going to be shared.
Yeah.
And then also our minimum is that if a young woman wants to have a phone call with you prior to placement, meet you in person prior to placement, that is something that you would do.
Okay.
And then after placement, the birth mom and the adoptive families usually come up with some kind of agreement. Agreement of what it looks like, what that relationship's going to look like, what that ongoing contact's going to look like. And that has really begun to evolve.
Okay.
It's evolved because there's so many different ways that we communicate with each other. That's just normal. The way that you and I communicate with each other. There's 5 to 10 different ways that you and I could communicate with each other through the day.
Yeah.
Whether it's email, whether it's by texting, whether it's by Skype, whether it's through some kind of social media app, whether it's Facebook. And so families and birth families have really found tremendous ways to continue that relationship, and it looks really different for everybody. But essentially, we found a more open experience for everybody. They just feel more comfortable communicating, staying in touch, knowing that everybody's healthy, happy, and people really actually enjoy having that relationship, all parties involved.
Well, and I think it's like any relationship, it evolves.
Right.
And so I worked in post-adoption for a while at Gladney, and we would see families start sharing what you're saying, like the minimum information. And as the relationship grows and evolves, and you have a relationship together, then that opens and continues to grow. Or families start more open. It just depends on preferences from the birth family and the adopted parent family.
It's not uncommon than any other relationship that you're in. You have to build some level of trust, understand that the other person's going to follow through.
Sure.
And once that happens, you're right. These relationships tend to evolve. People actually really enjoy them. They want to catch up. They want to make sure that everybody's doing well. So we've seen some really incredible relationships kind of bloom out of this situation.
That's really cool. You've impacted so many people at Gladney, birth families and adopted parent families. And I would love to hear from you what your advice would be for someone who's watching this and considering adoption as an option to build their family. I feel like you've just touched so many families and know so many family stories. What do you think is the best piece of information or like a little nugget you could leave them with?
Yeah. So thank you.
Yeah.
We don't know everybody's story before they walk through this door, but we do know that people have typically come from some difficult places and have had some experiences that have led them here. They've always particularly wondered if their family's going to grow, how it's going to grow, in what way and capacity. And so at least I want to say that they can kind of take that question off the table. Families know that once they enter this building, that it's not a matter of if any longer, but it's just a matter of when. And so if they can kind of rest in that, then there are moments that I just want them to enjoy in this process. It may feel like a really long journey, but if they can learn to celebrate the milestones, celebrate the small moments, celebrate the first time your caseworker calls you for an opportunity, celebrate when you took a leap of faith and went to your first Gladney Family Association meeting. All of these little things can help you enjoy the journey. And so that would just be my hope, is that they can rest in peace and that it's no longer if, but it's a matter of when. And that this process doesn't have to be painful and belaboring, but it can be joyful and exciting.
I love it. Thank you so much, Ashley, for sharing your experience and your language and the process. There's a lot of things that we talked about today that there are great resources for. And so one thing we talked about was the financials, and you'll find that in your show notes, as well as accurate adoption language. It's a tool that you can use in your community with people that you love in order to build everyone's understanding and empathy for what adoption actually is. So check out both of those links in our show notes. If you have questions or concerns, you can email us at podcast@gladney.org. Thanks for tuning in today. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Reframed podcast. Be sure to visit gladneyuniversity.org to access the show notes and discover upcoming trainings at Gladney University. We'd love your feedback, so please head to iTunes and rate, review, and subscribe. Until next time.